Hey everybody, and welcome to the second episode of The Bag of Holding, where we take a look at items from video games and add a little history to our gaming lore. And of all the game series out there that have historical ties, one of the ones that's always been most intriguing to me is the Assassin's Creed series, because they do this really great job of incorporating these historical figures and events into the plot of their games, and it's really cool to think about whether or not this stuff could have actually happened at the time. One of my favorite historical figures to have appeared in the game was Leonardo da Vinci, a key character in Assassin's Creed 2 and Brotherhood, most notably for his fabled flying machine. And it makes you wonder, could Leonardo have really invented this machine at the time? And even if he could, would he have known how to do it? Let's find out. Da Vinci's flying machine made its debut along with the legend himself in Assassin's Creed 2. It first shows up in the back of Leonardo's caravan in the Apennine Mountains, and Ezio's protected on the dangerous route. Leonardo responds to Ezio's inquiry on the machine, saying it was just an idea that might be able to make a man fly. Ezio laughs this off, dismissing it as an impossibility. Ezio finally gets to test this fabled contraption in Venice in 1485, where he crashes spectacularly after flying just a short distance. Leonardo quickly discovers how he might keep it aloft, as amidst his tantrum he tosses a scrap of paper into the hearth and witnesses it float above the flame, rising with the heat. As a result, he has Antonio and his men light bonfires across the city to keep Ezio aloft. Ezio flies beautifully across the city, kicking guards off rooftops, before the machine is set alight by an arrow and he drops to safety before it crashes into a group of guards. The machine then made a modified appearance in Revelations, where Leo had been forced by the Borgia to weaponize it into the Bomber, armed with a firebomb launcher. Ezio steals the machine and uses it to torch the Borgia's armaments. The now much beloved machine made one last appearance during the events of Assassin's Creed 3, where Lance O'Donnell gets his hands on Leonardo's blueprints and rebuilds the machine. Without the knowledge of its need for heat-powered flight, I guess Ezio left that bit out even though he recorded everything else, Connor crashes into the sea with the prototype. This machine is obviously based on the real Leonardo da Vinci's designs for a flying machine that, to our knowledge, was never fully realized. However, there are a few differences to note between the designs. The flying machine in the game is effectively a hang glider with immobile wings. However, for most of his life, Leonardo incorrectly believed that flight derived from the flapping mechanism of wings, and as a result, he studied many birds' wings to base a machine on this aspect. What he didn't know was that the flapping only provides thrust, while the inner wing is what provides lift. Leonardo didn't attempt to design a gliding mechanism until less than 10 years before his death in 1519, so this is already a chunk of plausibility gone. What's more, Leonardo didn't actually make the design for any kind of flying machine until 1487, 2 years after the events in Assassin's Creed 2. So would Leonardo have actually had the know-how to make the machine at the time? Not quite. But let's assume, like in the game, he had known how to make this machine. Could it have soared so easily as it had in the game? If you're like me, without much knowledge of flight mechanics, then the first thing you would have questioned is the idea of using bonfires to gain so much lift. This isn't actually so far-fetched though. In real life, glider pilots can gain lift in two ways, one by diving and then swiftly pulling up, allowing the wind currents created by the dive to lift the glider into the air. This method you can actually do in the game. The other way is by implementing a phenomenon known as thermal columns, which are zones of rising air from heat that gliders can circle in to gain air. These thermal columns are produced by uneven heating of the Earth's surface by the sun, as well as heat produced by highly populated areas. And that's just that relatively small amount of heat, so something like a bonfire giving a pretty big boost is pretty realistic. Touché, Ubisoft researchers, you win this time. There is another big factor here though, and that's the relationship between the weight and surface area of the glider. In order to figure this out, there's a lot we have to do, so brace yourself. I had to find Ezio's height, measure that relative to the screen image, find the length of the portion of the glider relative to Ezio's height on screen, calculate the full length of the glider first in screen length of units, then real units, calculate length, width, height, radius, etc. of every piece of this machine, calculate the volume of these pieces, use the weight per volume of the likely components, calculate the weight of the glider, calculate the surface area of the wings, and divide the weight of the surface area to get the pound per square inch ratio. So let's do that. According to Soul Calibur 5's character data, which is very specific, Ezio is 6 feet tall with all of his equipment on. I measured that value relative to the screen to get the height of his torso both in feet and in screen millimeters. I'd show you, but everyone's monitor is different, so that won't be much help. Then, I compared his torso to the glider and marked the points he spanned. I used this value to find the full length of the glider and used the ratio of on-screen millimeters to virtual feet as a basis of comparison. I implemented this ratio to convert on-screen values for length, width, height, and radius to feet. I can't... Why did I do this? Then I calculated the volume for each piece using various formulas. Historians have made an educated guess that it would have been possible for Leonardo to build a glider in this time with the most likely materials available at the time being bamboo and linen. So linen weighs 0.048 pounds per cubic inch and bamboo weighs 22 pounds per cubic feet. Throw in the volumes we found for the cloth and wood components, and we have a grand total of 46.01 pounds for the glider. The surface area is much easier, using the area of a triangle for each piece of cloth and removing the area of non-straight portions, giving us a surface area of 44.01 feet squared for the glider. Finally, we divide the weight of the glider by its surface area to get 1.0455 pounds per square inch. Is that it? Am I done now? Can I go home? Oh. Okay. Let's compare that value to the values of professional, modern gliders, which, from my sample size of 20, averages at about 0.4912 pounds per square inch. That means we'd need either half the weight or twice the surface area for the glider to fit with the mean. I'm afraid this difference doesn't fly. So unfortunately, the only thing this glider has going for it right now are those thermal columns. The date, design, and weight are all off. This flying machine needs some bigger wings and a few years on it if we expect it to fly. But that's really not too bad compared to when games usually get it wrong. So let's ignore all of that for a second and look at the bomber. This thing is just stupid. Look at the size of the barrel on this machine. You're telling me that this thing can launch a grenade and the recoil won't even make it budge? Let's freaking find out! To find out how firing the launcher will affect the glider, we'll have to calculate the backward velocity of the glider after having fired the bomb. Bear with me. First, we need the initial velocity of the projectile, so let's set up a diagram to represent this equation. We know from the distance meter in the lower right hand corner of the screen that the bomb was launched when the glider was 91 meters away from the target diagonally. If we time the shot, we also know that it reached its target in 1.64 seconds. The rest we'll have to fill in. We can use this equation to find the initial horizontal velocity, VI. Since horizontal acceleration is 0, we can drop the end, so velocity is going to be equal to distance divided by time. So we need the horizontal distance. Since this is a right triangle, we can use the Pythagorean theorem, where a is our horizontal distance, and can be expressed like this. Plug in our diagonal distance for c, now we need height. So let's use the formula for vertical displacement. Since it's falling, acceleration will be constant for Earth's gravitational acceleration, 9.8 meters per second squared. So that gives us a vertical displacement of 13.22 meters. In other words, we were 13.22 meters above the ground when we launched the grenade. Now, we want to take a gun and put it in my map. Let's take that value back to the Pythagorean theorem and we get 90.03 meters for our horizontal displacement. Finally, we take that back to our velocity equation and get 54.82 meters per second, or 179.9 feet per second for initial velocity. Now there's just one last step, so you might want to start waking up so you're ready when it's over. To find recoil velocity, we need to multiply the initial velocity by the weight of the firebomb. Let's assume 8.82 pounds, the mean weight of historical armaments of this sort, to get 1,586.718 foot-pound per second. Divide that by the weight of the glider we found earlier, and we have a velocity of 34.49 feet per second. That means our glider is getting pushed back at a speed of 34.49 feet per second when it launches the grenade. Yeah, that thing isn't going to just keep flying casually. This bomber is more accurately a suicide bomber.
The first design was effective. Everyone who piloted one died. Several even exploded. But we know this one works.
Yeah, I don't think so. So unfortunately, it looks like Ubisoft didn't quite hit the mark on this one. Wrong date, wrong design, wrong weight, and wrong armaments. But all things considered, they really didn't do too badly. I mean, they were only a little off for the most part, and it was a lot of fun to get to fly the legendary flying machine in the game. And hell, honestly, it was a little bit of fun to get to figure all of this out, even if it was time-consuming and headache-producing, and I'm never doing this again. But hopefully you guys thought this was an interesting way to do the show, focusing less on the in-game lore and more on the historical parallels and the plausibility of the item. So let me know in the comments what you thought of the shift in focus and if you'd like to see episodes like this in the future. Obviously I'm not going to do every episode like this. I mean, I really like looking at the in-game lore and theory too. And I have zero desire to do this again anytime soon. Oh, and I forgot to mention, the whole topic of this episode was actually Sunny Explosion's idea. So, thanks for the idea, Sunny. And go